Welcome back to Huddle Up, the show that talks all things football. Thomas Pocrnic and Luca Celebre. As always, Luca, we waited a very, very long time for the kickoff of the CFL season, but it has come and passed. The season is now underway. Tons of exciting games in week one. How you doing?
Doing great. It was an amazing week one. We had the defending Grey Cup champs kind of put their stamp on the season with a win against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Felt like a lot more of a dominant win than the Grey Cup game. The only team we haven't seen is Ottawa, which I think we're both really excited to see them in week two against that Winnipeg team. Drew Brown facing his old team, which will be fun. Storylines for days. But where do we want to start this show?
I think we should talk about some of the biggest storylines that we just saw in week one, some of our biggest takeaways. I know it's just one game in, and a lot of times we tend to overreact in these situations, but I feel like that's just the name of the game. So we'll do two main takeaways each. Where do you want to get started?
I'll start with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and I think I was riding for this team when we did our rankings, when we kind of did our tier list and who would be in the playoffs, who would be out. Saskatchewan, I think you had them going to the Grey Cup game, if I'm not mistaken, on the crossover side of things. So maybe they won't get there that way because they look really good. Trevor Harris, when he's healthy, that's kind of what we've talked about. He is still one of the best quarterbacks in the CFL. He's a conductor of that offense, and you add in the skill position players that they have. Sean Payne Jr. had 3 touchdowns in that game. Keon Schaefer-Baker, really good. AJ Ouellette, who they brought over from Toronto, a really awesome running back who made some plays in the passing game too. It was just interesting to see him being used that way. So I feel like the offensive side of the ball, as long as Harris has been healthy, has been good, and they can continue to get better and develop, and you see that from the young receivers that they have. But defensively is where this team, I think, has the highest ceiling with Corey Mace and all the additions they made. And yes, they gave up 21 to Edmonton, but when it mattered most, they shut things down and stopped the Elks from scoring and putting that game away, and allowed Harris to lead his team back in the dying moments of that game. So I think that Saskatchewan team, loved what I saw from the offense, but I think it's more encouraging to see the defense take big steps, and they're only going to get better with time as they become more comfortable playing under Mace, the language, the terminology. It's only week one, and they look this good already.
I think what impressed me most with that game too is how they won. Coming back down 21-8 in the fourth quarter, rallying around their quarterback, and also making some big key stops on the defensive side of the ball. Edmonton had their chances not only when they had the lead to put the game away, but also when they were trailing to tie it up and force overtime. And both times Saskatchewan's defense kind of stood tall and made sure that they get the win to open week one. So definitely some exciting times if you are a Saskatchewan Roughriders fan. I'm going to go all the way to the East Division and talk about the Toronto Argos, though, because they were probably our biggest question going into the season. How are they going to navigate the quarterback situation? Cameron Dukes, we hadn't seen a lot of him. Could he step in and immediately take this team to where they were last year? Just one of the most dominant, or the most dominant team in the CFL. And what a perfect performance from Cameron Dukes to kick off the season and really establish himself as someone who can be the guy for this franchise. 250-plus passing yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, just played very, very clean football. And on the defensive side of the ball, Jake Ceresno, what a way to announce yourself to the Toronto Argonauts fan base, came up massive in so many different ways. And of course, Flo Arimolade, who I picked to win Defensive Player of the Year, had a couple sacks too, and they were just all over VA. For them to come back and win at home, the Argonauts really put a stamp on the season early on, and give me a lot of confidence that they're going to be able to reach the heights that they did last season, even though they may look a little differently.
I think the biggest question outside of Dukes was the defensive side of the ball. We didn't know what we'd see because they lost their defensive coordinator, and they lost so much talent up front in the back end. So I know VA had a good game as far as like statistics go, had a 300-yard game. That's fine. But for them to sack him 6 times like they did and give Cameron Dukes every opportunity to have that comeback and to lead this team back, that defense impressed me a whole lot, as well as Duke's performance. And if, like you said, if they can get that kind of consistency from their defense, it'll only help a guy that's very young in his CFL career with a whole lot of pressure on him early in this season.
All right, takeaway number 2, where are you looking?
Takeaway number 2, I'm going back to the Edmonton Elks, that game against the Riders. We didn't see Trey Ford at all. We didn't see him record a carry. We didn't see him throw a pass. We were wondering what this would look like going into the season. It's a long season. It's only week 1. the game plan can change from week to week, and we could see him featured a little more. But I think it's really telling that they came out in week 1 and he really wasn't part of the offensive game plan at all. And if you're an Elks fan and a CFL fan, you want to see Tre Ford play based on everything he did last year. But if you're an Elks fan specifically, this guy is dynamic with the ball in his hands. And I think with a 21-8 lead, some running plays with him. Their running back was their leading rusher with 7 carries for 23 yards in the game. Like, he can contribute in some way. I find it hard to believe that even in short yard situations where they went with Dakota Prukop instead of him, he can contribute in a meaningful way for this team. After week 1, though, I really just don't know how much we're going to see him do that this season, barring injury to anybody on that roster.
I think I was a little surprised that he didn't feature at all, just considering how good he was down the stretch last year. And I think if you're looking at the grand scheme of things, if you are an Elks fan, there are a lot of positives to take away with how you performed in week 1 in a game that you really should have won. And I think it is a step in the right direction based on how last season went. And I think McLeod Bethel-Thompson's a very, very good quarterback, and he connected well with Eugene Lewis and Curly Gittins Jr., so that's all great. I just think that they can be a little bit more unpredictable when you add in a player with the skill set of Tre Ford. Like you said, it's still early in the season. There are still so much football to be played, but this is something that I would like to see down the stretch, and I think all of the league hopes that we see more of Tre Ford used, whether it's just in the red zone, but I just think if they're going to just drop back and pass all game and not do a whole lot in the run game, especially in a game where they were leading, they're not going to be as successful as maybe they could be on offense.
Totally fair point. What's your last takeaway from week 1?
I want to talk about Tyson Philpot. You mentioned him as someone who could be very intriguing as a player that could potentially win Most Outstanding Canadian this season. And obviously Austin Mack was a key departure of him going to the NFL from the Montreal Alouettes this offseason, and someone needed to fill that role. Well, we have our answer very early on of who that someone is going to be. Tyson Philpot in week 1, 10 catches, 141 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. One of them being an absolute bomb of a flea flicker from Cody Fajardo, a very, very pretty play to kick off the season. He is incredibly dynamic in the sense that he's great after the catch. He's a physical receiver. He's a great route runner. He's got very, very strong hands. He sort of just looks like that modern day CFL receiver that does very, very well in taking the pressure off his quarterback, being both an insurance blanket and someone who can take off the top of a defense. And I expect this to be a regular occurrence from him throughout the season long. He told me at Media Day that I should take him in fantasy. I should have listened to him because what a start to the season for him.
What an incredible debut for him. And we talked about some other receivers on that team as far as who could replace Austin Mack. Tyler Snead had a good game, but nothing like Tyson Philpot did. And Cody Fajardo has been locked in on him since that Grey Cup winning touchdown. It's awesome to see, and it's amazing to see him develop as one of not only the best Canadians in the game, but one of the best receivers in the game. His name is going to be in that conversation for years to come by the looks of it. When we come back, though, we're going to stick with Tyson Philpot because we did a fun segment with him at the CFL Marketing Day. Stick around.